Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, friends of Japanese prints. First of all, my name is Dieter Anschura, and I'm the owner and manager of the Artelino company. The Artelino company sells Japanese art prints in weekly online auctions, and we produce these videos always focused on Japanese prints on a regular and sometimes on an irregular basis. The subject of today's video is the Robert O. Muller collection. I will tell you everything what's behind. Regular visitors to our auctions, our auction catalogs, will often see prints with the subtitles from the estate of Robert O. Muller. These are mostly, nearly always, shin-hanger prints from the finest. Who was Robert O. Muller? Robert O. Muller was born in 1911, and he was an American dealer and a collector. And he had amassed one of the largest collections of shin-hanger, and many say the finest collection of shin-hanger that the world has ever seen. And Robert O. Muller passed away on April 10 in 2003, and it was really in the press, and a large public suddenly became aware of this huge, unbelievable collection, mainly of shin-hanger prints. After the death of Robert O. Muller, there were wild stories in the news about a red barn, a vault, a room in the form of a safe with thousands, 10,000s of shin-hanger prints inside. But nobody knew exactly what was going on and how large the collection really was. And dealers of Japanese prints, especially shin-hanger prints worldwide, were of course worried, because they thought, well, if this huge collection suddenly comes into the market at once, it would ruin the market once and forever. After a few months, the following happened. A representative selection of roughly 4,500 shin-hanger prints and all available documents, that was a lot, were bequested to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. Well, every American knows that. For those who don't, and for non-Americans, that's more than an institution, it's a world-renowned museum. And a few months afterwards, a large exhibition was held, and for this exhibition, an extra book was published, and I will show it to you. It's this one, Printed to Perfection, about this Muller collection. Has a bunch of nice images, and the best, at the beginning, you have a lot of text telling the story of the Muller collection, how Robert O. Muller created it. That's very interesting, recommendable book. Robert O. Muller bought his first Japanese woodblock print in the 1930s, and that sparked his interest in ukiyo-e, especially in modern Japanese prints. Modern Japanese prints at that time was mainly shin-hanger. And later, it was either in the late 1930s or in 1940 already, don't have it in my head, he bought the Shima Art Company. That was basically a gallery located in New York and held by Japanese people at that time. Robert O. Muller wanted to become a dealer in Japanese prints, and therefore he thought, okay, want to go to Japan to get to know the publishers and the artists. And in 1940, he went on a honeymoon trip to Japan with his future wife Inge, which actually turned out to be less of a romantic honeymoon trip. It was more a shopping tour. Robert O. Muller got to know all the important publishers in Tokyo, also in Kyoto, and especially Watanabe Shotsaburo. He was the main publisher. Some say he was even the inventor of shin-hanger, and he was the great mentor of shin-hanger. And he was the most important one. But he also saw others, Nishinomiya Yosaku, Adachi Toyohisa, Kato Junshi, and Sato Shotaro in Kyoto, and maybe others. And he got to know many of the best and most important artists of Shinhanga. There was among them Hasui Kawase, Ito Shinsui, Shiro Kazamatsu, and also Hiroshi Yoshida, who at that time already had his own studio and was independent. And Robert O'Malley bought in huge quantities from the publishers, but also directly from the artists. And we even know today how much he paid. He paid, for instance, for one Kozo Nohara print on an average 28 cents. Of course, 28 cents were much more worth in 1940 than today, but nevertheless it was a bargain price. And why? 1940, especially the relationship between the USA and Japan was pretty much on the floor down, and the image of Japan in the world, due to the aggressive military behavior of Japan in the Pacific region, was so bad. Japan had attacked China, and there was this huge massacre. And the Shinhanga business, especially for Watanabe Shotsaburo, was mainly an export business and mainly to the US. And therefore, Robert O'Malley could really buy for bargain prices. But it was not a good time for selling. Robert O'Malley came back to the USA and thought, okay, now let's start the business with my huge purchases of Shinhanga prints. And then what happened? On December 7, 1941, there was the attack of Japan on Pearl Harbor and the beginning of the Great Pacific War, which lasted until 1945 and ended with the defeat of Japan. Of course, there was a huge anti-Japanese sentiment in the USA, and Robert O'Malley had to close his gallery immediately. And even after 1945, it took a long time until he could recover. He had to start small. He made exhibitions in schools. But by the 1960s, Muller's business had established itself. There were large exhibitions in Europe and in the USA in the 1980s and 1990s. And when he was in Europe, a Dutch dealer, Chris Hulenbeck, he also owned a publishing company about Japanese books. Well, he got aware of that collection, recognized immediately its meaning, and published a wonderful book, The Great Wave. It's only about Shinhanga prints, and it shows only prints from the estate of Robert O'Malley. We at Artelino are often asked, well, how can I recognize if a print is really from the Robert O'Malley collection, respectively from the Robert O'Malley estate? Well, there's one answer. There is no 100% certainty. There is no 100% clear indicator. But there are a few indicators. And I will now let you know. First of all, there's a certain touch and feel. Let's call it guts feelings. The prints that the late Robert O'Malley had collected, they are of highest quality standard. And Robert O'Malley, he had a certain and an excellent taste. When you deal in these prints for years and years, you get a feeling on that. So touch and feel. Another indicator, because these prints have never been framed, and they have been stored for decades in a professional manner. They are usually always in flawless conditions. And now last but least, now it becomes a little bit complicated. There's another indicator. On many of the prints from the Robert O. Muller collection, you have a small little stamp on verso, on the backside of the print, made in Japan. Made in Japan. What is that stamp about? Well, it was a stamp that was used between 1921 and 1941, and it was mandatory by US laws for all goods from Japan exported to the US. Well, the stamp is not a reliable way of dating a print, nor does it mean that the print was actually exported to the US, but it indicates that it was made between 1921 and 1941, and that it was prepared for export to the United States during this period. But again, a stamp on a Shinhanga print doesn't necessarily mean that it's from the Robert O. Muller collection and the other way around, but it's a strong indicator. We are often asked by our clients, but what is the current state of the collection? Will it soon be sold out? Well, the part that went into the market, or are there still thousands or even 10,000s available? Well, let me give you a rough assessment. Many of the designs are now sold out indeed, especially those in Oban format by such artists like Hasui Kawase, for instance. Oban sizes by Hasui are still available, but for high prices. But on the other hand, smaller and middle-sized prints, like this one by Kozo Nohara, they are still available, and they are actually available for reasonable prices, reasonable reserves, let's say from 200 to 500. Sometimes can even see a print from the estate of Robert O. Muller for a reserve of 100. And these are still available. How many? Well, I cannot tell you. These come mainly from artists like Kozo Nohara, Shotei, Ito Sozan, Soseiki Komori, and a few others. But the rare designs, for those collectors now pay rather high prices. There's another question from our clients. Well, how can I be sure that a print that I buy from you is really from the estate of Robert O. Muller? Well, clear statement from my side, you have to trust our descriptions. When you read in our auction catalogs from the estate of Robert O. Muller, it means that this print was consigned by the Robert O. Muller estate. Okay, I think this is a clear statement. This, well, was a long video today. Let me finish with a quote by the Dalai Lama. I like his quotes. It goes like, remember that sometimes not getting what you want is a wonderful stroke of luck. Remember this quote if you're outbid in one of our next auctions of Shinhanga prints. Well, so much for today. I wish you a nice weekend, and of course I hope to see you in our auctions, and certainly for one of our next videos. Goodbye.